Yes, usually $500 million or thereabouts. This is called liabilities. But if they've got it, how can they be liable for it? Because it isn't theirs. Then why do they have it? It has been lent to them by customers. You mean customers lend banks money? In effect, they put money into their accounts, so it is really lent to the banks. And what do the banks do with it? Lend it to other customers. But you said that money they lent to other people was assets? Yes. Then assets and liabilities must be the same thing? You can't really say that. But you've just said it. If I put $100 into my account, the bank is liable to have to pay it back, so it's liabilities. But they go and lend it to someone else, and he is liable to have to pay it back, so it's assets. It's the same $100, isn't it? Yes, but then it cancels out. It means, doesn't it, that banks haven't really any money at all? Theoretically. Never mind theoretically. And if they haven't any money, where do they get their reserves of $249 million or thereabouts? I told you, that is the money they have made. How? Well, when they lend your $100 to someone, they charge him interest. How much? It depends on the bank rate. Say 5.5%. That's their profit. Why isn't it my profit? Isn't it my money? It's the theory of banking practice that when I lend them my $100, why don't I charge them interest? You do. You don't say. How much? It depends on the bank rate. Say 0.5%. Grasping of me, rather? But that's only if you're not going to draw the money out again. But of course I'm going to draw it out again. If I hadn't wanted to draw it out again, I could have buried it in the garden, couldn't I? They wouldn't like you to draw it out again. Why not? If I keep it there, you say it's a liability. Wouldn't they be glad if I reduced their liabilities by removing it? No, because if you remove it, they can't lend it to anyone else. But if I wanted to remove it, they'd have to let me. Certainly. But suppose they've already lent it to another customer. Then they'll let you have someone else's money. But suppose he wants his too, and they've let me have it. You're being purposely obtuse. I think I'm being acute. What if everyone wanted their money at once? It's the theory of banking practice that they never would. So what banks bank on is not having to meet their commitments? I wouldn't say that. Naturally. Well, if there's nothing else you think you can tell me, quite so. Now you can go off and open a banking account. Just one last question? Of course. Wouldn't I do better to go off and open up a bank? Section 1. What creature is this? What is the Federal Reserve System? The answer may surprise you. It is not federal, and there are no reserves. Furthermore, the Federal Reserve banks are not even banks. The key to this riddle is to be found not at the beginning of the story, but in the middle. Since this is not a textbook, we are not confined to a chronological structure. The subject matter is not a curriculum to be mastered, but a mystery to be solved. So let us start where the action is. Chapter 1. The Journey to Jekyll Island. The secret meeting on Jekyll Island in Georgia at which the Federal Reserve was conceived. The birth of a banking cartel to protect its members from competition. The strategy of how to convince Congress and the public that this cartel was an agency of the United States government. The New Jersey railway station was bitterly cold that night. Flurries of the year's first snow swirled around streetlights. November wind rattled roof panels above the track shed and gave a long, mournful sound among the rafters. It was approaching 10 p.m., and the station was nearly empty except for a few passengers scurrying to board the last southbound of the day. The rail equipment was typical for that year of 1910, mostly chair cars that converted into sleepers with cramped upper and lower berths. For those with limited funds, coach cars were coupled to the front. They would take the brunt of the engine's noise and smoke that somehow always managed to seep through unseen cracks. A dining car was placed between the sections as a subtle barrier between the two classes of travelers. By today's standards, the environment was drab. Chairs and mattresses were hard. Surfaces were metal or scarred wood. Colors were dark green and gray. In their hurry to board the train and escape the chill of the wind, few passengers noticed the activity at the far end of the platform. At a gate seldom used at this hour of the night was a spectacular sight. Nudged against the endrail bumper was a long car that caused those few who saw it to stop and stare. Its gleaming black paint was accented with polished brass handrails, knobs, frames, and filigrees. The shades were drawn, but through the open door one could see mahogany paneling, velvet drapes, plush armchairs, and a well-stocked bar. Porters with white serving coats were busying themselves with routine chores, and there was the distinct aroma of expensive cigars. Other cars in the station bore numbers on each end to distinguish them from their dull brothers, but numbers were not needed for this beauty. On the center of each side was a small plaque bearing but a single word: Aldrich. The name of Nelson Aldrich, senator from Rhode Island, was well known even in New Jersey. By 1910, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C., and his private railway car often was seen at the New York and New Jersey rail terminals during frequent trips to Wall Street. Aldrich was far more than a senator. He was considered to be the political spokesman for big business. As an invested associate of J.P. Morgan, he had extensive holdings in banking, manufacturing, and public utilities. His son-in-law was John D. Rockefeller, Jr. 60 years later, his grandson, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, would become Vice President of the United States. When Aldrich arrived at the station, there was no doubt he was the commander of the private car. Wearing a long fur-collared coat, a silk top hat, and carrying a silver-tipped walking stick, he strode briskly down the platform with his private secretary, Shelley, and a cluster of porters behind them hauling assorted trunks and cases. No sooner had the senator boarded his car when several more passengers arrived with similar collections of luggage. The last man appeared just moments before the final "all aboard." He was carrying a shotgun case. While Aldrich was easily recognized by most of the travelers who followed his ride through the station, the other faces were not familiar. These strangers had been instructed to arrive separately to avoid reporters, and, should they meet inside the station, to pretend they did not know each other. After boarding the train, they had been told to use first names only, so as not to reveal each other's identity. As a result of these precautions, not even the private car porters and servants knew the names of these guests. Back at the main gate, there was a double blast from the engine's whistle. Suddenly, the gentle sensation of motion, the excitement of a journey begun. But no sooner had the train cleared